Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel for the final wrap up of 2022. So I know it is technically now 2023, but we are going back to the end of December for me to wrap up my December reads. December was a decent reading month for me, but I have to admit that it is the month where I listened to the most audiobooks of any month of the year. I actually doubled. So the prior to December, the most audiobooks I had listened to in 1 month was 3. In December, I listened to 6 audiobooks. And it is because I was basically incapable of doing anything in December. I was so sick for most of the month that I just lay there, and luckily I could lie there and listen to audiobooks at the same time. And they were really good audiobooks. I really enjoyed the audiobooks that I listened to, and they helped me actually get through the books that I needed to get through for the end of the year. But we're going to do this very similar to all of the previous months. I have my reading journal here, and I'm just going to go through the books in the order in which I read them. The very first book that I read for December was a Christmas romance. So I was reading something I wanted to get in the holiday spirit. And like I said, I was feeling a little bit under the weather, and I'm not a big Christmas movie person. Like, there are some Christmas movies that I like to watch every year, but I'm not a big Hallmark Christmas movie person. And in actual fact, I'm not a big romance movie watcher. I don't like watching rom-coms or romance films, but I do love reading romance novels. So the very first book that I read was called Kiss Her Once for Me, and it was a sapphic Christmas romance, and it was delightful. I gave it 5 stars, which is very, very rare for a romance novel for me. I really like romance, but I acknowledge at the same time that there are a select number of tropes that people use in romance, and it can be difficult from my perspective to get everything that I want out of a romance novel. And I think part of this as well might be that I read a lot of fan fiction. And in fan fiction, I already am really invested in the couple, because I would not be reading fan fiction if I was not invested in the couple that the fan fiction is written about. And so I get like these really high highs from reading romance fan fiction, and then like traditionally published romance can often not reach those same heights because I don't feel that instant connection to the characters, which makes total sense and is not any fault of the author. But in this story, I did feel an instant connection to the characters, and it just combined a lot of the tropes that I really like. So this is told in a dual timeline. We have the present Christmas, and then we are kind of flashing back to scenes from the previous Christmas. And our main character is really down on her luck this Christmas. She is having a crappy time at work. She has been fired from her dream job and is working as a barista and just doesn't know where her life is going to go next. And one day, one of the cute guys who actually owns the coffee shop that she works in comes in, and she finds out that he needs to fake date someone in order to bring home to their like family's Christmas getaway in this like cottage in the woods. So she agrees to be his fake date. And when that happens, when she arrives at the family cottage, she finds out that this man's sister is actually a woman that she had this like very magical day with the Christmas before, and who left her feeling like heartbroken afterwards. So unfolds this like very quirky rom-com where we have to see like the shenanigans that this character gets into with the sister of her now fake boyfriend that she is fake dating. And we also get to see the really heartbreaking scenes from the Christmas before that led to the fracture between the two female characters. And it just combined, like, it was the perfect combination of like cozy Christmas traditions, found family, because the kind of fake boyfriend slash kind of ex-girlfriend's family is delightful, and the main character does not have a lot of family connections. So she falls in with this family really quickly and starts to feel really close with all the extended family members. So that we have that like warm and fuzzy found family that is especially fun around Christmas time. And then there was just like the angsty drama unfolding that told us what happened last Christmas and how those feelings have carried over to the present Christmas. So it just combined a lot of the things that I really, really love in romance. And I really liked the main characters here. So our main character is someone who is very neurotic, very on edge, is definitely struggling with a lot of anxiety and is unsure about her direction in life. And the main love interest is a woman who is like very brash, very loud, finding her own confidence and kind of like setting out to differentiate herself from her very close-knit family. So they're personality types that I find really interesting to read about. I think that they had great chemistry together, and it was just a delightful holiday read. It was excellent. I will buy a copy. I had picked this one up on Kindle, but I will buy a physical copy, and I'm sure I will make this part of my holiday tradition. I will definitely be rereading this book in December from now on. After that, we had Augustus. So this was another one of my 5-star reads, and I actually listened to this one on audio. I really, really liked the audio, but I had to be fine with feeling a little bit lost from the beginning. So for anyone who doesn't know, Augustus is a book that a bunch of people were reading on BookTube in November. I think Alan over at the Library of Alexandria was the person who kind of kickstarted that read along. But this is the story of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and it's told in an epistolary style. So we get letters that are penned by Augustus himself and letters that are penned by people within his circle. And some of those people are his family members, some are his friends, some are his enemies. And so we get a variety of perspectives on the life of Augustus and the way that Rome is changing under his rule and what is happening with his friends and family. And it is fascinating. I wasn't sure because everybody was like, people were giving this 5 stars all over the place. And I was like, I'm not sure if this is going to be a 5-star read for me because I don't know that much about Roman history. Like what I know essentially comes from either media like TV and like fictionalized media, not nonfiction, and the play Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. So like that is all of the experience I really had with Roman history before this, but it was excellent. It was fascinating. I love the epistolary style. Like it's really it makes books seem like you're going through them really quickly because you want to jump from letter to letter to letter. It took a little bit to get used to all of the names. I personally am fine with not recognizing everyone's name in a story right away and just acknowledging that it is going to happen. Might not be in the first 5 chapters. It might not be in the first 10 chapters. It might take half the book before I actually feel comfortable knowing who everybody is, but I trust that it will happen. And so that's why I didn't mind reading this or listening to this via audiobook. But if you are somebody who wants to work really hard to keep everybody straight from the very first page, then probably reading this physically or at least immersion reading it is going to be the way to go. But I had no problem with the audiobook. John Williams' writing is beautiful, stunning. It was so lovely to listen to, and I'm really glad I picked this up. It did what all great books do, which is it made me feel close to the characters, but it also made me want to read more about this period in history. So now I want to know more about Roman history. I want to know more about these characters and about the world that they lived in. So it definitely accomplished those goals for me, and I am really happy I read it. And thank you to Alan, because this is a book that I would never have picked up if not for him. Like this would not have even been close to my radar for sure. So really glad that I got to that one. After that, the third book, which was also an audiobook for me, was Sharp Ends by Joe Abercrombie. So this is the collection of short stories that comes between the standalones in the First Law universe and the Age of Madness trilogy. And I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed this short story bind-up. I've heard mixed things about Sharp Ends, so I've heard people say like, you know, short story is not really Abercrombie's forte, you need more time to get attached to the characters, etc., etc. But I really, really, really liked this. There were stories that were from the perspective of characters from previous books that I adored, so I loved listening to those ones. Joe Abercrombie narrated a short story that I found particularly enjoyable. There is the very last short story in this collection is a short story that provides an alternate point of view on a character that we become very close to in the original trilogy, and it shifts your thoughts about this character, about the events of the first trilogy. It is a very powerful short story, and for no other reason than to just read this short story, I would highly, highly recommend picking up Sharp Ends and not making it one of the books that you skip if you are going to skip anything in the First Law universe. I really, really liked it. I'm trying to look at, because I did write in my journal my favorite ones. So Three's a Crowd was excellent. Made a Monster is the story that I was talking about that I thought was really profound. And Skipping Town was the story that included a character that I really loved from one of the previous novels, so I was really happy to read that one as well. But this was, like I said, a delight. I would absolutely recommend listening to these short stories or reading these short stories before diving into the Age of Madness. So really glad that I decided to do that first. After that was the channel read-along book. So this was The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. I am going to do a full review for this one as part of my Sci-Fi Classics review series. So I'm not going to talk too much on it right now, but I will say that this was a 4-star read for me. I thought that it was excellent. If you have not heard of The Lathe of Heaven, it is a sci-fi standalone by Ursula K. Le Guin. And the premise is that we have a man who can change the world with his dreams. He can change the fabric of reality with his dreams. And he is really upset about this. He's trying to do everything that he can in his power to not dream, to prevent himself from dreaming or sleeping. And while he's trying to do that, he gets picked up by the authorities and he is assigned to mandatory counseling. So he goes to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist discovers that he has this power and then wants to use that power for his own means, I guess. Like, he wants to use it to create a world in his own vision. And it was really fascinating. I wanted to pick it up because I am a psychiatrist, and I was thinking, you know, like, if that happened to me, what would I do? Would I do anything? And I wanted to read through it and see, and it was fascinating. I think this is absolutely worth picking up, but like I said, I'm going to do a full in-depth review for this one, so you can keep your eyes open for that. And if you want to learn a little bit more about this story and its influences and its place in sci-fi canon, then absolutely give that review a check out when it comes out. Number 5 was A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. So I could not stop myself from starting the Age of Madness trilogy. I put out a video like a couple of weeks ago saying that this was one of my top priority series for 2023. Well, it's now an ongoing series for 2023 because I could not hold myself back from starting this and reading A Little Hatred. This is another one that I did on audio. I already had the audiobook. I had picked it up during an Audible sale, and it was just there on my phone, and I thought, I need to read an audiobook, and I really want to go and continue on. I'm telling you, Red Country lit a fire in me, and I cannot stop with Joe Abercrombie right now. But this is absolutely a 5-star read. It's always questionable when you are continuing in a universe that you love, but with a new generation of characters. Like, are you going to enjoy them as much as the previous characters? Are you going to like the direction that the author goes with the story? Like, how are you going to feel about it? And so far, I am loving what Abercrombie is doing here. This has his signature style, his wit, his heart-pounding action sequences, his big twists. It was everything that I wanted out of this trilogy. And to be quite honest, I was a little bit worried that I wasn't going to like Age of Madness as much as everyone else, because I'm not a big, like, flintlock fantasy person. I don't necessarily want modernization in my fantasy stories, and that is what this is about the First Law universe going into their own modern age. But it was excellent. I imagine that Joe Abercrombie did a lot of research about how things changed in our own world, and he reflects that back in a fantasy world, and it is really, really good. I have new favorite characters, I am invested already, and I am ready to have my heart broken because I am sure that that is what's going to happen by the time I reach the end of this trilogy. But I expect to finish the Age of Madness relatively quickly because I don't want to stop. I want to keep going. After that, the 6th book of the month that I read was my lowest rating. So this was my 2.5-star book, and this one was called Merry Little Meet Cute. So this was a second holiday romance that I read, and this one was actually a read-along with a couple of friends on Discord. We had all picked a Christmas romance that we had never read before, and we wanted to discuss it in the week leading up to Christmas. So I read this one like a week before Christmas Day, and unfortunately, it was a little disappointing. I think it was disappointing for most of us. The premise sounds really funny and really unique. So what we have is, one day I will make it through a video without having to take a coughing break, but I don't know how far in the future that is going to be. But what I was saying is that the premise of Merry Little Me Cute is that our main character is an adult film star, and she gets a call from her agent or from the director or the owner of the studio that she works for, and he is making basically what is like a Hallmark Christmas movie, and says, our main star had to drop out of this movie. I need someone to fill in really quickly, and I need you to be the star of this movie. She has always wanted to be an actress and not just an actress in adult films, and so she is really excited about the opportunity. So she says yes and signs up. The only caveat is that obviously the director who is working for the this universe's version of the Hallmark Channel does not want her identity as an adult film star to be released to the world. So she's supposed to keep that part of her identity under wraps. Her co-star is an ex-boy band member who has come on financial ruin and who has a really tarnished reputation as being like the industry's bad boy, and he's trying to kickstart his image and go back to being someone who's wholesome and who can be sold to the masses. So the last thing that he needs is any complication on this movie set. And obviously they are placed in close proximity with one another, and a romance starts to develop. What's interesting is that the main male character has been subscribed to the female character's in-universe version of like OnlyFans, which is like her own personal channel that she uploads content onto. So he knows who she is from the very moment that he meets her. And he is panicked because A, he has a huge crush on her, and B, he knows that if anybody finds out about her background, this could mean ruin for him and his family as well. So there's that kind of like underlying tension of needing to keep your identity secret, and also that kind of will they, won't they for the romance. What I liked about it is, like I said, the premise was really interesting. It was really funny. It was a combination, of things that you don't necessarily think will go well together, but I thought were really fun. And I think that this would make a great holiday movie. I think I would enjoy watching this as a holiday movie. But as a Christmas romance, it did not fill what I needed it to do. There was not enough emphasis on the Christmas stuff. Like, unlike in the first romance that I talked about in this wrap up, where there's a lot of like family activities and they're doing like all of their traditions, it feels very cozy and Christmassy. This one is just a romance with a really neat hook that happens to be set at Christmas. There's nothing really that feels Christmassy about it. There's a lot of like instant lust in this story, which makes sense because the main male character is familiar with the female character's work and he already is very attracted to her. But because they had that instant connection, there was not the kind of buildup that I was expecting. And this was fairly lengthy, actually. It was almost 450 pages, which for a romance is pretty long. So you would think that there would be more time to build up that relationship and make us feel invested in the main couple. But unfortunately, that did not happen. Some things that were really good about it, there was a lot of body positivity. This is a plus-sized main female character, and they do a great job of having her in the story without like making any like fetishizing anything or making the main character like her despite her size or anything like that. It was just very naturally done, very well done, and I enjoyed that part of things because even in romance novels, we still don't see a lot of plus-size female characters, so that part was really nice. But overall, it was just a little bit of a disappointment, unfortunately. After that, I read a bunch of Elric. So I had fallen behind on the Elric read-along that I was doing with Joanna and Evie and Andrew. And so this month I got the Elric audiobook and listened to the next 3 stories in the Elric bind-up, which were The Fortress of the Pearl, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and The Weird of the White Wolf. So those are the last 3 Elric stories in that first volume of the bind-up. And I did really enjoy them. I gave The Fortress of the Pearl 3.5 stars. The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, I gave 3.5 stars. And The Weird of the White Wolf, I gave 3 stars. I did have some issues with that one. But I'm not going to talk a whole lot about them in this wrap up because we are going to do a live show for that overall. And I imagine once I have finished all of these Elric stories, I will give a bigger review for like the greater Elric universe and what I think of the stories just in general. But I will say that I am enjoying them. I am not loving them, but I am finding it rewarding to read them, especially given the influence that Elric has had on the rest of the fantasy genre. So it is a story that I'm happy to be reading, but not one that's becoming a new favorite or anything like that. But I will save my in-depth thoughts for that live discussion with my friends. After that, the 10th and penultimate book of 2022 was Heaven Official's Blessing Volume 2. This one I gave 4.5 stars, and I absolutely loved this one. I've talked about this author, MXTX, who's a Chinese author, and this is the third series of hers that I am reading, and also the most recent series that she has published. And at least from my perspective, and I know that I'm coming through this after a layer of translation, and the translation for her 3 stories are done by 3 different people, so I am aware that I cannot be like an authority on how well these stories are written, given that I don't have the complete cultural context. I don't speak the language that these were written in initially. But from what I have available to me, which is the translation of all 3 of these stories, Heaven Official's Blessing seems to be the best written of the 3 for me. Which makes sense because every author improves their craft as they continue to write, and this is the newest of her stories, but it just has a flow and a seamlessness that I did not see in the previous 2 novels, and I am loving it. This one is so good. I'm really sad because this is, like I said, the last story of hers that I have not written, but I am loving it. I love the romance. I love the setup, the plot, the mystery. This one also kind of has a dual timeline element to it, and it is just so enjoyable. I love it. These are really hard to talk about because they're so long. They come from like a serialized web novel, and it's hard to talk about volumes without spoiling the story overall. But once I finish all of MXTX's works, I will try to do some videos on those just so that I can introduce some people who are not in those kind of like fandom spaces to the stories and introduce you to something that may end up being a book that you really love. And for my last book of 2022, I finally read The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. So I did it. I finished the Mistborn trilogy, and I went through a host of emotions when I was reading this book. And it wasn't even the book itself that was making me feel this way, but I had told myself I was going to finish this book, like whether I was in the throes of death, I was going to read it, and I did. And I ended up enjoying it. It was, like I said, I gave it 4 stars, but I have to admit that the beginning of this book is a struggle. And I have to acknowledge that I was forcing myself to read it, not in that I wanted to DNF it or anything, but I just really wanted to finish it before the end of the year. So that, like, forcing myself to read through it probably increased my irritation at some of the things that happened in the beginning that would have been irritating anyway, but maybe not to the same level. Like I said, I thought the beginning, it could have been much shorter. We're 3 novels in. I do not need Brandon Sanderson to explain the same things to me over and over. I know how the magic system works. I know what the metals do. And even if I don't remember what they do, there's a chart in the back of the book. Like, you don't need to keep stepping me through this. There's, as always, like a lot of repetitiveness in terms of his prose, his phrases. Like, I think that all of his books could be condensed and be a more enjoyable reading experience. However, I cannot go by without letting it be said that Brandon Sanderson is a phenomenal storyteller. He constructs these stories so purposefully weaving in the clues and the hints throughout the entire series, and then giving you a conclusion that feels absolutely satisfying. I really, really liked the last 200 pages of The Hero of Ages. I don't know if this changes when we get to his newer works like Stormlight Archive, but he's very heavy-handed with his foreshadowing. So like a lot of the reveals that happen at the end of the story, I was not surprised by any of them, and a couple of them I had known outright were going to happen because just of the things that he would repeat throughout the story, the attention that he would draw to specific details or specific items. It's very hard to keep reading about those same things over and over and not acknowledge what they mean for the story overall. That being said, I still really like the way it all came together. I think that Mistborn, and I'm sure stories for all novelists, for all authors, help them process some of their own internal struggles, some of the things that they have gone through. But some of the themes of this final novel in particular are not things that mean a lot to me. And so that could be one of the reasons why it didn't resonate with me as powerfully as it would for someone else. There's definitely really strong religious undertones to this book, and a lot of like struggling with belief and faith and what that means and how that can impact you. And it's really, really well done. It's just not something that I care to read about. So I think overall, like as an entire novel, this is probably my least favorite of the 3 Mistborn novels, but I did really like the ending. It probably is my favorite ending of the 3 of the books. I really like the ending of book 1 too, so he does a good job with his endings. But overall, I'm really glad that I read Mistborn. I will be taking a break before I decide if I'm going to continue on with Era 2 or not. I will at some point I would still like to read the Stormlight Archive, but I need to take a little pause from Brandon Sanderson for a little while. That being said, very happy that I finally got to read the final Mistborn book and wrap up my 2022. So that is it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of December. I would love to know from all of you what you read at the end of the year. What was the final book you read this year? And I wish you all the best in 2023. I'll see you with another video soon. Bye.